All right, I was just admonished we need to stay on time today, so. I'm Eric Dahlen. I'm the steering committee lead for the sustainability project here at OCP, and we're gonna kick off the sustainability track this morning with a panel. We'll give you updates on the projects that we've initiated underneath the sustainability initiative, and I will bring up the panelists here in just a minute. And our theme for this year, we just kicked off this project within the last year, and I think we have some pretty substantial progress on a couple of fronts. And what I wanted to do today was set up kind of the vision of what we're trying to accomplish with the sustainability project, the sustainability initiative, and kind of tie the projects back into that. So I'll go ahead and get started. My panelists today are the project leads, plus DJ. So first, Dani Cartagena. He's also a principal engineer at Intel. He leads the telemetry project. And then DJ, you guys all know the ICP co-chair, or OCP co-chair, and the ecosystem lead at Meta. And then Sammy, his first name's more complicated than that, but he goes by Sammy. And he runs, he's a firmware architect and a cloud solutions guy here, senior principal engineer also at Intel. So thanks for joining me, guys. I'll give you guys a microphone for when you need it. Sammy and I'll share this one. And to start, I think we'll just talk about kind of what we're trying to accomplish, right? So what we really want is the ability for anybody using infrastructure on-prem or in the cloud or in multiple clouds, right, to be able to do autonomous optimization of their footprint, right? That would have substantial implications, right? And the reason we think that's important, we want to enable the ecosystem, basically foster technology from all of our supply chain and partners here at OCP that enables energy and carbon aware DevOps and orchestration, right? If you could do that, you could actually decide what you want to run, how you want to run it, where and when to run to minimize the footprint. If that's one of your objectives. You could make that one of your objectives and you could factor it in with cost and other things, right? But those decisions are going to require visibility into the footprint of what's been allocated to this running job, right? An application or a tenant or a set of applications, and the resulting energy consumption from the assigned infrastructure resources, right? And the reason that we think this is important, I think you've seen some of the data from when we kicked this off last year, right? We've shown that, you know, what language you select and which libraries you use and in what environment you run that, on what kernel, right? That combination of the software stack on which you do the exact same work can vary 50x in how much energy it takes to get the job done. And most people are trying to optimize for developer velocity, which is fair, right? There are good reasons for that. But we would like to make it possible for people to factor in their footprint as well, right? And that's going to take not just kind of these hardware changes and software changes so that it's possible to discover the kind of the inventory of what you're running on and the energy associated with that inventory, but you can imagine you also then need to be able to look up, you know, what is the carbon footprint associated with the BOM that I'm using and what is the carbon intensity of the energy I'm using. So that's kind of where we're headed, and these are kind of the building blocks we think we need to define, establish, standardize so that software, wherever it runs, has access to this kind of information so that it can do this. That's kind of the vision. And so launching a new work stream in sustainability. This is not really an official project yet, but I did bring, one of the reasons DJ's up here is to talk about the other thing we're working on is community, right? So we have the three projects I mentioned, the sustainability metrics, the power telemetry, and then carbon modeling. We have those three projects already going. We'll give you updates on those in a minute, and then I'll throw some questions around to our project leads. But then DJ's also going to talk about community, right? Because OCP can't do this on its own, obviously. So we'll talk a little bit about why OCP and what role OCP plays. But in order to have carbon-aware DevOps and orchestration, that's going to require an awful lot of stuff that OCP and OCP players don't do, right? We'll have to connect to a whole lot of other work elsewhere in the ecosystem to get that to happen. So I will move on to project updates. I think from a community perspective, We do have some collateral available, right? And I have a QR code that you can link to and look at this white paper. We have a white paper that's kind of the scope, goals, and charter for the sustainability initiative. We held a workshop last summer with a bunch of companies in attendance up in Oregon. And that was the start of this community thing. We're trying to kind of harmonize the industry initiatives and make sure we're plugged into them, they're plugged into us. Things that should be here, get here. They're aware of what's going on here so they can plan for it and align to it. And then I will pass off to Dani on power telemetry. If you could say a few words about what's going on over there. They're working on hardware metering and monitoring. So.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. So, relatively new work group. I mean, kind of like all the others, but probably even more new than some of the others. But I mean, basically just what Eric said, right? Establishing the expectations and capabilities for power telemetry, and then defining, like, what are the API, what are the interfaces to get that information to the the different areas so that it can be rolled up as part of metering and understanding, where's the power going and how's it being consumed, and then leveraging that for other decisions.
Thanks. Yeah, so that's one of the necessary but not sufficient things, right? The hardware has to know what its power is so that can be exposed to software, and then we need to standardize the format of the data exchange and what interface you get to it. Which leads to the carbon modeling project. So we had Scott Chamberlain was running that. He left and moved on to other things, and so we handed that off to Deb Bernstein, who couldn't travel to be here today. So I'll talk briefly about the carbon modeling project. That's really the software side, right? So we're going to need a couple of APIs through which you discover your energy and through which you discover your inventory, the things that I talked about, and then make it, standardize some tools and some processes for how to use that information. And we have a white paper draft out for review. I think under this project heading, under the Sustainability Initiative, you can find this white paper. And the intent is to go build then some reference algorithms. Obviously, we're not trying to get anybody to run our software, but we're going to show how the software can be done, and we'll make some tools available if you don't want to do it all yourself. And from there, we'll move on to efficiency metrics for the data center.
So in the data center efficiency metrics, what we are doing is we are looking at what are the different metrics available today. And we are also trying to see where are the gaps or opportunities to improve. And first, have the understanding. Once you have an understanding, then we can go and define what we can do. Especially what we are really looking is, when you are looking at the IT systems, what the data can come out of that system, and how do we want to represent that into metrics like PUE or any other sustainability metrics that we have. Can we map to that metrics and close the gaps that we have? So a lot of discussions going on. We have some draft metrics we are putting together. It's not final. We have a lot of materials, and we are trying to create a white paper after this so that we can release it for a review for a wider community.
Thanks, Sammy. And then I think we're going to start with some questions, and we got mics out there so you can ask the panelists questions as well. And my first one is for DJ. I just wanted to talk, you had a lot to do with why there is a sustainability initiative and how it got to be the fourth tenet. So can you talk to why these work streams are important to sustainability at OCP?
Yeah, absolutely. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining today. I think we have explained motivations behind a lot of these work streams over past, but the basic idea is scope 3, if you look at for most of the companies, becomes a very dominant factor. Just to give you one data point, Meta reported 8.4 million metric tons of carbon for 2022, out of which 99% was scope 3 emission. And that actually leads to all the equipment which is being put into data center. Open Compute project is all about gear which go into data hall. So all of these work streams are trying to find an answer to understanding scope 3 better through the value chain. So that's a basic North Star. You can look at all the complexities, but the North Star is very simple. How do you get a handle on scope 3 emission for any company operating a data center? And then on the community side, the way I look at Open Compute project is, if you look at a server, open server, you can walk in the expo hall and you can look at the server layout. You have a compute, you have a power supply, you have storage, you have cables. And actually, if you go to 100,000 feet up in the air and you look at a large-scale data center, it's almost like a fractal image of that server. And Google coined this term warehouse scale computing, but basically you have a whole building which is a computer. And you can almost one-to-one map the server layout with 100,000 feet view of a big data center. So now using that fractal image analogy, you will see that there are things which go into the data hall, which is what OCP controls. And then there are things which are around the data hall. For example, a server has a mechanical chassis and a building has a concrete walls, which is also a chassis, right? And you heard, for instance, Partha from Google talk about in his keynote on the work which is being done in concrete. And I know Priya is working with others in community on the data center facility side, which is managing the concrete. A lot of these things are being done in areas and communities which are tackling things which are outside the data hall. We as Open Compute community are working on things which are inside the data hall. So working with these community becomes very critical because using the same fractal image, you want to reduce the footprint of the data center, which you see from 100,000 foot view. And that requires working across community. And in fact, I also want to give a shout out to Shruti from Microsoft. She organized a 1-hour session yesterday where one of the topic which was discussed was how to find ways to not solve everything within OCP, but find way to leverage people across the community. And that's actually a very important element, which I think all of us can play a very important role. And if you have ideas, please reach out to any of us or please reach out to Shruti. And we can try to drive this forward. And the goal is, 1 year from now, imagine if OCP has some strategic alliance with some community outside OCP where we are solving one particular problem which is not in the data hall, but outside the data hall, but it's part of the data center. So that's the vision I want all of you to keep in mind, and then you can operate on those lines.
Thanks, DJ. And I think from the 30,000 foot view, we'll go down into the trenches now. And Dani, can you talk a little bit about why it's important to standardize some of these telemetry metrics and at what interface levels we think we need standards?
Sure, yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, like you said, down in the trenches is probably very appropriate, right? I mean, you can't, as the saying goes, you can't improve what you don't measure, right? So I think as power telemetry is just absolutely foundational to achieving the missions that DJ and everybody's been talking about for sustainability, understanding where the power is going, when it's being used, how it's being used, and really just, starting with the ground level, setting expectations about, what we're going to measure power on, what are the expectations for accuracy. If you're talking about telemetry, you got to think of things like sample rate, like how often are we providing this. How cumbersome is that, right? Is that impacting performance? Is that have power overhead itself, right? We want to make the right decisions for that. But at the end of the day, there's the big kind of out-of-band and in-band kind of goals and challenges for telemetry, right? I mean, we want to make use of all this equipment. You mentioned we have a warehouse of computer and networking and all this equipment using energy. We really need to know, where's the energy being used, what's it being used for, being able to track that so we can improve things like utilization across the data center. And then the end goal with this also has to go all the way out to the user, right? Eventually we want to get to where our warehouse level data telemetry is available all the way out to the end user so that, as Eric mentioned, right, somebody developing an application, maintaining an application can continually make those software optimizations, right? They want to be able to recompile their code, make a change, and then eventually the end goal is that they would have visibility into, hey, how much energy did I save? Did this run faster? Did it run more efficiently? How much compute resources I use? So I think, the standardization really just sets the foundation, the framework for being able to have the information to make all those decisions informed ones.
Thanks, Dani. And then continuing with that theme, I think, Sammy, can you talk to kind of what metrics we're trying to pursue in DCEM and kind of what order you're coming at them?
The first metrics we basically said like we should look very deeply is the PUE. When you look at PUE, it contains the IT and non-IT in a data center level. Now we want to take that into a system level and a rack level so that you can internalize it. How do we make it be useful? So for example, fans, do you want to consider that as part of the non-IT? If you consider it, you need to have a fan power need to be measured. So we are trying to look at in detail in a system level, how do we represent it? When you aggregate, then it's becoming a data center level, right? So that is the big work, a lot of discussions going on in that area. Not just the IT, right? We also need to look at the network. We also need to look at how do we comprehend the network as part of your real useful network versus non-real useful network. So we are looking at that also. And we had a lot of discussion on the how do you account for water and cooling and other areas. But we have not made a lot of other progress in the other area. I think current focus is let us get the PUE, alternative, not alternative, complement, we are calling it as IUE. That is a thing we want to get it defined and give a white paper out, which what Jani is working, right? All the APIs he's defining. You can define a lot of APIs, but we need to figure out how are you going to utilize it and represent it as a matrix that can be used. So that is kind of complementary work, what we are doing that's going to be used by the other side of it.
Thanks, Semi. And there's a fair amount of opportunity there. I think we talked about this at our workshop in the summer, and we showed some data here last year as well, right on this stage, or actually the stage over there. But there's a fair amount of energy that goes into the IT equipment, right? The numerator of PUE that doesn't go to the devices doing the work and isn't proportional to how much work is being done. And so trying to get a measure of that and so that it can be monitored and you can try to improve it over time, right? We're kind of still in the bad old days, I think. The analysis that we did showed that we still have like 50% plus overhead, right? In terms of how many watts we need to pull into the racks to actually get the watts into the devices doing the work. And you know, physics is a monster and won't go away. So we're not going to get that down to nothing. Just like PUE, you don't get it down to zero, but we could do a lot better than we're doing now, we suspect. And then Dani, I'll throw back to you for a minute. On the telemetry front, right? It's kind of a necessary but not sufficient thing, right? One of the challenges we have that we need to kind of navigate here at OCP is that in order to get this kind of high-level vision, we're going to end up touching a whole bunch of different projects that aren't under the sustainability initiative. We don't want to just like, from a bureaucracy perspective, get in our own way. So can you talk a little bit about how the telemetry project interacts with the other projects and kind of some of the challenges you see with getting this done?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this is my first time at OCP, and I'm just like impressed with the breadth and the depth of all the specs and standards and stuff across. So I mean, I think part of it's going to be kind of twofold. I think the first part's going to be making sure we're complementary and compliant with existing OCP specs, or going in there and actually influencing them. So if we look at the hardware specs, if we look at the interface specs and the expectations, whether it's within the own power telemetry spec or again, a chapter and a part of those setting expectations for, okay, if you have a device, if you have a server, if you have a component, something that's critical, how is power going to be measured? Again, expectations of accuracy, sample rate, and then the interfaces. So I think it's going across the existing hardware specs and making sure that we've interface with them and put what we need into them. And then it's also to bring it back to this forum and these goals here, right? I mean, Sammy talked a lot about the goal to have, better measures for data center efficiency. And it's making sure that, of course, anything that we want to do there is going to rely on having power telemetry for those components. We can measure up and understand, okay, where is power's going? I think we're going to kind of build bottoms up from starting with the compute server and understanding just where things going and CPU, memory, fans, et cetera. cetera. And then it's going to quickly kind of go out. Do we go to disaggregated memory? Do we go to switches? Do we kind of cover the rack? And then it's like, okay, from there, is there then expectations for, well, we've seen a breadth of liquid cooling and those kind of technologies. Are we appropriate attributing there? What are the expectations for reporting of power there? So I think it's kind of starting at that compute level, going up and making sure that we are providing everything we need for the type of metrics that are at the forefront of, that Sammy mentioned, of improving our sustainability of data centers.
Thanks, Danny. And then DJ, go ahead.
I can add one other point. I think another way to kind of influence in a soft manner across projects is to bring sustainability tenet as one of the things where perhaps power telemetry team can define some kind of a parameter which should be present in the specification, and then folks will come and ask sustainability group, I don't understand what you're talking about here, and then that automatically fosters some kind of a conversation. So that could be, over a period of time, a very subtle way to influence across all of the different projects without actually explicitly going and embedding. Just a thought.
Yeah, that's a good thought. Thank you. And Shruti and I talked about this a little bit as well. We had an exchange. You can imagine that one of the things you could look at, or maybe you would want to look at as someone who's curious about this or trying to monitor or, God forbid, regulate these things, right? If someone has a zettabyte of data, right, what is the energy footprint per terabyte of data that you store? Right, that's an easy question to ask. It's a really hard question to answer, right? And you could obviously talk about adding intensity onto that. Like we said, we wanted to be able to associate carbon intensity with these energy measurements, which we need to talk more about. But that means you could talk about the lifetime carbon footprint of a terabyte of data, right? And one of the things you might want then is on your storage devices, right? What is your watts per terabyte rating or something like that, right? We could certainly think about something that OCP compliant things have to report, right? And maybe it's discoverable through an API, right? Where in the carbon modeling work group, we'll have to talk more about this, obviously. Right? I actually met with someone whose contribution to the ecosystem is more in tapes and backup, and I was telling him that's one of the things we don't have, right? In the cloud, we are all aware that we have zettabytes of data, exabytes in different locations that add up to a whole lot more, and it's doubling in a short time horizon, 18 months, 2 years. In the vast majority of that data, if you're a provider, you don't have the rights to delete it, but no one's asked for it in a long time, right? So a big challenge of the fleet is trying to tier the data and get it as cold and energy intensive and get the cost intensity down. But there isn't really a metric that you're optimizing. You can show, hey, the reason I use tape is because my lifetime footprint of the data, if I need to keep it but you don't need it, as a real-time 1,000 IOPS, kind of a target, I can show you this metric gets a lot lower. You can trade off these things, right? But we don't have that other thing that's getting better when the performance is getting worse. So people tend to optimize for cost or performance, and who knows what happens with energy and footprint. So sorry, I go off on tangents here, but DJ, I'll throw back to you again to talk about kind of the community. Can you talk a little bit about, do we have any specific industry bodies and consortia that we want to align with or interact with? You talked about strategic partnerships.
So obviously my knowledge is highly limited in this space, but there's one community which actually keeps coming up again and again on the data center side, and that's iMasons, where there is a lot of common companies which are part of OCP as well as part of iMasons, and that would be the first logical step to go and find some common areas where they can solve a problem, which we can then use in our solutions within OCP community. So as a roadmap, one of the things we could do collectively together is put our brains together to figure out which are other such communities. For example, liquid cooling and immersion cooling is becoming an important element, and perhaps there is a community which specializes in characterizing all of the different type of liquids which are used for heat exchange elements. and then go and talk to them, and maybe they are already looking at sustainability aspects of these material which are being used in this system. In which case, while we are working on those similar projects here within OCP, we don't need to reinvent the wheel, because maybe the expertise lies on the side where people are chemists and materialists and understanding liquid properties and heat exchange properties, which might be beyond the scope of a lot of folks in OCP community. So we do what we are good at, and we try to find way to connect with communities where they are good at something, and then we leverage across. Or we can take our problem statement to these communities and say, I don't know how to solve this. You guys are the expert. Can you come back and tell us what we should be doing here? That's actually a very nice way to leverage. And trust me, engineers love to solve problems. So when you go and present your problems, you will be surprised the amount of help you will get. It just needs to be done in some very thoughtful manner. And I think opportunity exists. We just have not started thinking about that. So I, again, encourage everybody to think in those terms.
And if you have thoughts on those along those lines, by all means, reach out to DJ, reach out to Shruti, reach out to me, because this is obviously very much a work in progress, right? We kind of have a vision of what we're trying to do. We haven't done it before, and the best way to do it is something we're still kind of casting about to understand. So Sammy, the DCEM work group kind of just got going, right? So it's kind of early days there. Can you talk to what kind of participation you've got? Do you have any gaps in coverage that you'd?
Yeah. I think we started about 2.5 months back, probably like 10 sessions, so maybe 3 months back, 10 sessions probably we had. We are meeting weekly Friday. We were meeting Monday 7 o'clock, and now we moved to Friday 8 a.m. So for a little West Coast friendly. What we are seeing is when we started, we had around like 8 to 10 people participation. Now it's kind of sustaining around like 5-6 people participating on a regular basis. We would like to see more participation from multiple different companies, so that we don't want to kind of define something and again you have to rehash it again. It's better if we have a lot of participation. It will be much easier to kind of come to a consensus on the changes that we are making. Anything else you want to? Okay. Thank you.
Thanks. And I think I'll throw one final one to you, Danny. I think these metrics on energy obviously are not Intel specific or even CPU specific, right? Can you talk to kind of the range of telemetry metrics that you think are kind of in scope for that project?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, without a doubt, I think I think we're going to progress kind of in hitting some low-hanging fruit, right? I mean, we have a pretty good set of standards and templates from Redfish so far as like compute level server, what's the typical components that report power. I think there's some low-hanging fruit to just kind of like look at that, see if there's any gaps there, and then again make some expectations on our accuracy, sample rate, and then make sure it's complying with the other, like DCA, MHS, and all the other OCP specs. And then from there, I think the range. I think we just kind of continue to go out and evolve to where we kind of from a Pareto-like approach, right? Get the critical components and then steadily work out to where we can measure everything that's needed to make a really good informed DCM, data center level measures of efficiency. So I think it's it's going to go out and span, I think, from the compute server, then we're going to go into anything beyond it at the rack level, and then, like I said, then there may be a boundary, and we decided, do we also tackle what becomes a little bit more of an infrastructure, some of the cooling and things that may be almost rack specific, seem to be a natural extension, and then beyond that, it gets to be a little bit more difficult whether we tackle it. But I think starting with the compute server, starting with memory and storage, starting with fans and the cooling that are local, I think are the low-hanging fruit, and we're going to go after those first, and then over time, I think it becomes a challenge of the interfaces, right? We can provide that to rack manager software, data center operators, so far as like accounting and then efficiency so far as utilization, but then getting to sort of that last mile of like, how do we provide this to somebody who's running an application under a hypervisor, maybe on a multi-tenant server, right? So That I think is going to present different challenges, more in the software and API levels. But I mean, I think that's definitely going to be an end goal so that we hit all the way out to the end user, those and empower those who are writing applications, maintaining applications, and services to then iterate and make them more efficient over time.
Thank you. So I think I'll leave a little bit of time here. I think we have 8 minutes for the audience to ask questions of the panelists if you have questions. And I'll tee up kind of one other point here. You can imagine, so I talked a little bit about kind of a not fully baked idea about storage, energy, and carbon footprint. You can imagine what you would want to be able to do if you're, so I was inspired by something that a couple meta engineers brought up years ago, actually, was they had come up with this clever idea of when you release an update to the cloud software platform, right, which you do updates to weekly or multiple times a week, they looked at, okay, when I load this onto the server, before the load balancer gives the server any work to do, what did that do to the energy footprint of the server? Right, where a new release, and the reason that they stumbled into this is because they found out that what you did in terms of which packages you updated, you could move the power of the server like 5 or 10% just by which version of the platform was running before you load balanced any work onto the system. And that's kind of part of this, IT side, energy efficiency. How do we take that dull roar of consistent power you can't get rid of, and then the proportional power, get some visibility into what those are so that those can be improved over time, or at least you can look for infrastructure that does better instead of worse over time. But we talked about the storage side. You could imagine you'd also want to know, you could change the footprint of a job by how much network traffic it generates. If you can do it with X amount of east to west traffic versus Y amount of east to west traffic, there actually is energy and utilization. There's a footprint to network traffic, but that's pretty hard to get your arms around, right? And it's not really in scope there's no one agent that can report for every gigabit of traffic I generate out of the data center network, what's my footprint? It's a question you may want to answer. I'm not sure how to answer it, right? So there are some things we need to work on, right? I think in terms of what's in scope and how would you do this. And one of the reasons I bring that up, I'll share that I'm also engaged with the Energy Efficiency Directive Consortium over in Europe. I've talked to those guys, and from outside in, if you don't know much about infrastructure, these are questions that you think there should be answers to. So, all right, I will let you guys ask some questions here. Thank you. I think you were up first.
Yes. Hello, my name is Jeroen van Bemmel. I work for Exergy, and I submitted a paper to the sustainability track about a topic that I think might extend the scope of what you're talking about. So if you look at energy, electricity, what they call the carbon intensity of the power, it varies throughout the day, right? If the sun is shining, you have low carbon intensity. If it's night or if there's no renewable resources, it's high carbon intensity. So the paper is about if you can shift your usage of the grid to a time when it's lower carbon intensity, you can save emissions and try to quantify how much you can save. And my question is for Dani, are you taking into account the source of the energy and enable application to figure out what is the carbon intensity of the energy that they're using at that moment?
Yeah, I think the first steps are in just purely measuring, capturing, reporting energy, and then providing it up sort of through the stack, if you will, through all the way up to the different rack managers or data center managers. I think there'll be, and this might be something we end up interfacing with and setting standards on, which is that, okay, at when does you start tagging that, this just happened at a certain time of day, or it came from this solar panel, and 60% of the energy we contribute to this or that. And then it becomes at that sort of data center level or maybe rack manager level of saying, of properly accounting for, again, what's renewable, when was it used, and then making sure it tracks with, all the way down to the end user if they need to have that available, whether from accounting standpoint or from ideally, I think what you're inferring, like an optimization standpoint, right? The data is good for tracking, reporting, understanding what's going on, but then next level would be making informed decisions and actually optimizing and changing behavior, because that's really the end goal.
And in fairness to Dani, that's actually a carbon modeling work group problem, not a telemetry work group problem. So he's going to give us the energy. The other interfaces for intensity, the inventory intensity and the energy intensity would be in carbon modeling, but we can certainly take that up there. There was a question over here.
Yeah, hi, I'm Jordan from Meta. My question is, a lot of the updates that were shared are, around telemetry, efficiency and really optimizing almost once a lot of the carbon has already been locked in. You know, DJ framed up that a lot of us are, or a lot of companies are now tackling their Scope 3 footprint, and that's dominating most of companies' greenhouse gas inventory. So I'm curious if you could elaborate on what's sort of your theory of change for how these projects will be able to make a difference when it comes to upstream Scope 3.
Upstream Scope 3. Well, so I didn't probably do justice to the rest of the sustainability initiative, so thank you for pulling us back. So yes, I'm an engineer. I get very excited about energy efficiency as something that we can control or improve, and need to be able to tell whether we are or are not improving that. There's actually a lot more to it than that. If you follow this QR code, right, the Sustainability Initiative white paper talks also about circularity and modularity and reusability and life cycle management and all those other things that are part of sustainability that are distinct from efficiency. And so there absolutely is work like that going on in the Sustainability Initiative. I think we do more of that at the initiative level. We don't have a specific project on those topics yet. We are aware of some projects like in Server and elsewhere. We reviewed at the steering committee some input from on a sustainable way to build a chassis, right? Reduce 90% reduction in plastic, material reduction, and recyclability. So there is more to it than that. Thanks, Jordan. You're right.
Hi, this is Christoph from Scale Up. I have a question. You mentioned the white paper draft for the carbon modeling. Is that available? Can that be seen somewhere? Because, so background is I'm working on a government-funded project in Germany, basically tackling the same problem, so it would be quite helpful to...
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it is available. We can send me a note.
Okay, thanks.
And one addition I would make on carbon modeling is we are initially looking at carbon modeling, which is embedded carbon in silicon as one of the primary aspects, because silicon makes a very important component in everything which goes into the data center. So understanding carbon intensity of a silicon, which is in server or an accelerator or a NIC. So that's where we are starting from.
All right, we have to be mindful of the group that's behind us, but thank you for your time this morning. Our call to action, by all means, if you have interest here, join one of our teams. We also want to encourage people that are active in other projects and in other initiatives to kind of factor sustainability into what you're contributing, right? Think about the footprint of what you're doing, try to plan for minimization, try to be aware of what we're doing over here and how well aligned or you are or are not with what it is we're trying to accomplish. And particularly where we have these new interfaces and monitoring tools we're trying to build, make sure that we're plugged into that, help us keep all the work groups apprised of those things so that we know what's required and not optional and we don't blindside each other with changes.
Yeah, and I might, at the expense of missing somebody, I want to shout out two names. Jordan, which you just heard, she led first 2 years when we launched the initiative. She pushed the community forward to move sustainability into a full project. And JM here as well has done very seminal work with the community on developing circularity white paper. So if you get chance, please reach out to these folks and talk more about what all ideas they have. Thank you.
Thank you, panelists.
Thanks.